Hello, this is Kathy at Nothing So Strange, and I am doing a VR to Simon at the Hermit's Cave tag Tarot Journey Through Decks. And there are 4 prompts with this tag. The first is the beginning, the deck that started it all for you. The second is the deepening, decks that helped you grow, learn, or deepen your practice. The third is the now, the decks that currently resonate with you the most. And 4, which you can put anywhere, the milestones, any other decks that mark significant points in your tarot journey. I've really enjoyed watching all the other VRs that have come out to this tag, and it's prompted me to make my very first VR. So, in one sense, these 2 decks, the RWS and the Visconti Sforza, were my first decks, but it's in a strange way. So, I'll start with when I was a kid. In the 70s, anybody who's a 70s kid might remember it was a spooky time. You know, everything was witches and ghosts and the Bermuda Triangle and reincarnation and fortune tellers and ESP and just spooky things. And I don't mean to offend anybody who doesn't like tarot characterized as a spooky thing. I tend to just say spooky things when I'm talking about anything esoteric, anything ineffable, anything that you can't see in the room with you necessarily. And so, that was the atmosphere that was around. And so I don't remember when I first heard about fortune-telling cards or tarot cards. There's not a moment I can think of when I didn't know what they were. They just are something I feel like I've always been aware of. But there is a moment when I'm in high school, between my junior and senior year in high school. If you are not familiar with American education, I would have been 17, and it would have been the summer before my last year in high school. And I was in a summer program, fancy summer program, and we were reading poetry, and we read The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, and I loved it. And so I came home and checked a book of his poetry out of the library. If this is the point where you figure out that I was a nerd child and now I'm a nerd adult, you're right. So I read the poem, and very complicated. I didn't really understand it. I could tell somebody was going somewhere to do something, and that was about all I could make out. But the tarot figures so prominently in the poem, and my mind was just blown by this poem. It took me months to do research and figure out what it meant, what the metaphors were, what he was talking about. And so this was the first time, well, let me take the poem first and then talk about its impact on me. Tarot figures really prominently in this section where we hear from Madame Sosostris, the clairvoyant with the wicked pack of cards. And this part is just so beautiful. Here said she is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor. And those are the pearls that were his eyes. And here is Belladonna, the lady of the rocks, the Lady of Situations. Here is the man with 3 staves. And here's the wheel. Here's the one-eyed merchant. And this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the Hanged Man. Just amazing, the imagery here, and it goes on through the whole deck. You have the tower blowing up here near the end. Tower's upside down in the air. Whoops, wrong page. And yeah, the falling towers. And then here at the end you have him talking about the deck. And just a quick aside, there's a lot of scholarship discussing what cards he's talking about. And a lot of disagreement about it. And I think I'll do a video about that someday because it's so interesting to me. There's pretty much a lot of agreement, though, that in his scholarship, when he says he doesn't know much about the cards, he's lying. So that's a great story. I'll get back to that someday in another video. So anyway, the tarot at this point lodges in my head as the source of metaphor and imagery that explains the world, explains, in his case, the dissolution of early modern society. It just locked into my head, and ever since then, it has been a reference point, a beautiful metaphor. Maybe a year or two later, I encountered the Visconti Sforza again in a book. I don't have the book, but I was reading some books by Italo Calvino. This is still one of my favorite books ever, Invisible Cities. I read If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, and then I read The Castle of Crossed Destinies, which, as books go, I don't like it as much as I like the first two, but it's important to me because it involves 2 groups of travelers who mysteriously lose the ability to speak and are all together for the night in a castle and are trying to tell each other their stories using only a deck of cards. And it's the Visconti Sforza that they're using. It was a beautiful book. It had images of the cards. I need to hunt it down and get a copy again. I know back then I just checked it out of the library. But again, there was this idea that these cards contained these images that you could mix and match and find truths and tell stories. They're just so very beautiful. So that was my second encounter with the tarot, and despite the fact that I didn't get either of these decks till much later, I think of them as my first 2 decks, because they've been in my head since the 1980s. And I guess a couple of years after I read the poem in the book, one of my friends got a RWS, and she and I used to sit around and do spreads and read meanings out of the little white book. I loved it. She just had the basic RWS, the writer deck in the yellow box. Loved it. I can't say it was really satisfying with the little three or four keywords, for each card, but it was fun. And so that was my first experience actually doing spreads, playing cards. I was probably about 21, 22 at that point. And that was the 1980s. And so tarot is lodged in my head, and I never got a deck, which is really weird because I liked tarot imagery. I would always look at pop cultural things with tarot, and I mean, tarot is always popping up in movies or on TV or in art, and I always enjoyed that a lot, but I never got a deck. And so we need to come up to 2014, and my much loved cousin died. She was really like a sister to me. It just still breaks my heart. And when I was going through her things, she always loved beautiful things. She just had such collections of beautiful things. I found this deck of cards. Cards of Chaos, imaginary tarot cards. And I brought them home. And just treasure them. They're so neat and so fun. It's this little bitty deck. But I wasn't happy to get them that way. But I would take them out and look at them a lot. And it just made me so happy to have this beautiful deck. And I learned recently that this artist has at least one tarot deck. I've been talking to somebody online who showed me pictures from it. Isn't that great? Energy, entropy. Sleep and dream. Just looking at these, you can see why they would have meant so much to me as something I brought home from her house. Anyway, so there was that. Somewhere in there at an auction, we picked up this deck of fortune-telling cards, which obviously somebody wore out their old fortune-telling cards and cut them out and attached them to another deck. And these are fun. You will hear something unpleasant. Pay no attention to something you are going to hear. You will shortly occupy a strange bed. And these obviously are heavily used. Twice over, a dark woman is trying to get you into trouble. You have a few trustworthy friends and one unsuspected enemy. So, never figured out what the original deck is there. If anybody recognizes those, let me know. Drop me a note in the comments. Okay, but, so I don't get a deck. And then, fast forward past some blah, blah, blah. 2020, all of a sudden I started getting decks. it was just time. So I got this, which is the RWS Borderless US Games version, which I already went through a bunch, but I just absolutely adore these cards. And I mean, once the dam broke, it broke hard. I thought, do I want to learn Tarot or do I want to learn more Lenormand? So I got Lenormand decks. I got a bunch of other decks, none of which I'm going to show because I didn't realize there were counterfeit decks out there. And I ended up with a bunch of counterfeits before I realized what was going on. And this was great. And I started playing around, learning to read, and got a few how to read books. I had the Weight book. I got some Rachel Pollard, which I love Rachel Pollard books. I was still having problems, though, figuring out how to read, how to make stories. So here's where we get to the deepening. And it's funny how this worked. I'm such an Alice in Wonderland fan. It's something that is always in my head. Yet another system of metaphors that's in my head. This is actually my mother's Alice in Wonderland. So when I say it's always been in my world, it's always been in my world. It's published, I think, in the 20s. And she got it when she was quite small. And so I had a friend. I noticed this about my friends. Every time one of my friends goes anywhere in England, they come back with Alice in Wonderland gear for me because they know how much I love it. And one of my friends brought me back this beautiful pack of cards. And it really is nice. Just a regular deck of playing cards, but just beautiful images, and each card has a different image. It's got Wonderland and Looking Glass, the Tenniel illustrations. And when I was having problems figuring out how to read the cards, when I had the meanings and I would do the spreads and it just wouldn't come together for me, I started doing readings and doing spreads using these cards instead of tarot. And I didn't, assign them correspondences with tarot or anything like that. I would just lay them out, and I know these images. I know these stories. I know this is the unicorn. And I know he's taking a break from battling with the lion, and he's talking to Alice and saying he thought children were fabulous monsters, and she says she thought he was a fabulous monster. Unicorns were. And, then they hand around cake and get drummed out of town. And so it was so helpful practicing reading with these stories that I know so well, these images that represent these stories I know so well. And, knowing these characters, knowing how they fit in the story, knowing how each one relates to the other images. And after I had played around with these for a while, I picked up the tarot again, and this time the tarot worked for me. I felt the same way about the tarot images as I felt about these images. I understand the characters now. I understand the plot. I know how they work together. I can fit it together into a story now. So that was the deepening. It was really cool. Where am I? Okay, well that brings us up to, because it was so late, that brings us up very close to now. Here's some other things that are going on. I find this was one of the first decks I got when I got the first tarot and the first Lenormand, and I find now that I'm very much attracted to, number one, campy fortune-telling decks, and number two, decks of any sort by authors that I like. I'm a huge Edward Gorey fan, and so when I found this hilarious Fan Todd pack, I had to have it. If you're an Edward Gorey fan, then you'll know that when you look at the guidebook, every card is going to have a horrible meaning. And so Edward Gorey, the waltzing mouse, May, vertigo, loss of jewelry, a bêtise, morbid cravings, disorders of the large intestine, corruption, equivocal symptoms, a hazardous project, brawl, suicide, involuntary seclusion, and shriveling. So, I'm still, hope y'all can't hear the noise from the street, I'm still looking for cards that resonate with my earlier literary experiences. Sorry, I had to pause while some people were being noisy outside. I love this book. Do y'all remember this book? Griffin and Sabine. The plot was told in letters that were in these beautiful envelopes. Ah, such a wonderful book. And so when I saw that the author of that series made oracle decks, oh, you know, I was all over it. Yep. This is the Archaeo. Understanding your archetypes. Just beautiful, beautiful. I just can't look at that enough. And second deck, the river. Slightly different art here. More vivid, more collagey. Really a different mood with that one. Both wonderful. What else is in my now? I've started replacing all the decks that I accidentally got as counterfeits. So happy to have a real copy of the Black Violet now. I had to wait for the mass market to come out because it was sold out before I started looking. But yeah, I know the author and artist Heidi Phelps. One of her influences is Beardsley, and you can tell just so beautiful and such a nice, sleek, pared down interpretation of the RWS. What else? Big fan of Todd Alcott. And I saw this and I really wanted it, and then I realized I'd been following I guess his Facebook page for a long time, because he is just hilarious. And what I really appreciate about this is that while, with this one, he has really nailed the pulp style, and with the horror deck, he's nailed the horror style. Same with the sci-fi one. He's so true to the RWS. It's just a real fun deck to read with. But I've done the same thing everybody does and bought a lot of decks. The other influence, well, there have been a couple influences. A year and a half ago, right before Halloween 23, opened a curiosity shop. And while I knew I wanted tarot decks. I love them so much. And while I was looking for decks to put in the shop and looking at wholesalers, I, was like, I don't know what decks to put in the shop. So I went online and looked for videos showing me what all the decks looked like and which were the most popular decks. And this is when I found Tarot Tube. It took me until 2023. And I started off just looking at deck reviews, and more gradually got interested in the other content. What else? But the decks I have in the shop are not necessarily the decks I have for myself. I have this in the shop. This is just for me. Yeah, this is just for me. Carry this in the shop. Black Violet's in the shop. I don't really have fear of missing out for myself, but I have it for the shop. I'm like, what if there's a fabulous deck and people come in the shop looking for it and I don't have it? Wouldn't that be terrible? Which is funny because it's a little shop in a little town that there's just not a lot of people walking around on the sidewalk here, so it's funny that I have fear of missing out here. The very last, had to pause for a minute while I found this. The very last thing I want to talk about, and I don't know if this is a milestone again or just something now. I've been working with other people from the Hermit's Cave Facebook group to do a collaborative deck, and the members who came up with this idea, Kim and Bonnie and whatnot, are just so fabulous, and they've put in so much work. Can't say enough good things about just the talented individuals in the group and how much fun it's been. But I signed up to do 2 cards, the Moon and the 3 of Wands, and I thought I would use collage, and I thought I would use existing art. I love art. I was an art history major. Can't get enough of it. So I thought that would be really fun. And then I did the moon first. And the moon there, and then our little lobster crawling up out of the depths are existing art. But somehow my own photographs took over the whole daggone card. And those are my dogs, Zelda and Bruna. That's their personalities there. And that's a photo I snapped at the oldest ironworks in America, actually. They're removed from that background because it was pretty cluttered, but place of power, that is. Smokestack down the street for me. Those are my own roses and lilies from my own garden. It's a field next door. I started looking around and realizing how I've put so much from the tarot in my own life. I mean, it's a lot of roses and lilies to have in your own life. Three of Wands here. The ocean's from St. Augustine, Florida. Oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the country. But I've put a ship in there from a photo I took at the Blackbeard Festival in Hampton, Virginia. That's a walking stick, Middle Dynasty Egyptian walking stick, public domain art from the Metropolitan Museum. I figured that was nice, powerful. But again, my own plants are the leaves. So this has been a milestone because I've realized that I do surround myself with these images. And it took this project to make me aware of that. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I will, if I can figure out how, I will link to Simon's original post in the description, and thank you for listening.